It was the first night in my new apartment, a sleek, modern space on the 15th floor of a high-rise building. The city lights twinkled below, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the bustling metropolis. I had just moved in, eager to start fresh in this vibrant city. As an urban planner, I appreciated the architectural beauty of the building, but something felt off. That night, as I was unpacking, I heard a faint, rhythmic tapping sound. It seemed to come from the large window in the living room. I paused, listening intently. The sound was so subtle that I almost dismissed it as my imagination. But then it grew louder, more insistent. My heart began to race as I approached the window. I peered out into the night, but all I saw was my own reflection staring back at me. The tapping continued, now accompanied by a soft whispering that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just the building settling or perhaps the wind. The next day, I went about my routine, trying to ignore the unease that had settled in my chest. I spent the day at work, engrossed in my projects, but the memory of the tapping and whispering lingered. That evening, as I returned home, I noticed something strange. The windows, which had been spotless the day before, were now covered in smudges and handprints. It was as if someone had been pressing their hands against the glass, trying to get in. I cleaned the windows, hoping to erase the unsettling evidence. But that night, the noises returned, louder and more persistent than before. The tapping was now accompanied by a scratching sound, like nails on a chalkboard. I could feel my pulse quicken as I listened, my eyes darting around the room, searching for the source. I decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, I walked through the apartment, checking every corner. As I approached the living room window, the scratching grew louder. I shone the flashlight on the glass, and for a brief moment, I saw a shadowy figure standing outside. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. When I looked again, the figure was gone. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The noises continued throughout the night, keeping me on edge. I barely slept, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. The following day, I decided to do some research on the building. I discovered that it had a dark history. Years ago, a series of mysterious disappearances had occurred in the area, and the building itself was rumored to be haunted. Tenants had reported strange occurrences, but no one had ever been able to explain them. As the days went by, the noises grew more frequent and more disturbing. I began to see fleeting glimpses of the shadowy figure, always just out of reach. My once peaceful apartment had become a place of terror, and I knew I had to find a way to uncover the truth before it was too late. As the days turned into weeks, the disturbances in my apartment grew more intense. The tapping and scratching sounds became a nightly occurrence, and the shadowy figure outside the window appeared more frequently. My once peaceful sanctuary had transformed into a place of dread and fear. One evening, as I sat on the couch, trying to distract myself with a book, I heard a loud thud against the window. My heart leaped into my throat as I turned to see what had caused the noise. There, pressed against the glass, was a handprint, smeared and dripping with what looked like blood. I stumbled back, my mind racing with terror. I knew I had to get to the bottom of this. The next day, I decided to visit the building's management office to see if they had any information about the apartment's history. The manager, an elderly man named Mr. Patel, seemed hesitant to talk at first. But after some coaxing, he finally opened up. "You're not the first tenant to experience strange occurrences in that apartment," he said, his voice low and serious. "Years ago, a young woman named Emily lived there. She was an artist, and she spent most of her time painting by the large windows. One night, she disappeared without a trace. The police investigated, but they never found any evidence of foul play. Some say her spirit still lingers in the apartment, trying to communicate with the living." I felt a chill run down my spine as Mr. Patel spoke. Could it be that Emily's spirit was trying to reach out to me? Determined to find answers, I decided to do some research on Emily. I visited the local library and combed through old newspapers and records. I discovered that Emily had been a talented artist, known for her hauntingly beautiful paintings. Her disappearance had shocked the community, and many believed that her spirit was trapped in the apartment, unable to move on. That night, I decided to confront the spirit. I set up a camera in the living room, hoping to capture any paranormal activity. As I sat in the dark, waiting, the tapping and scratching began again. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the windows, my eyes straining to see any movement. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped, and I could see my breath in the air. The shadowy figure appeared outside the window, but this time, it didn't disappear. It moved closer, pressing its face against the glass. I could see its eyes, hollow and empty, staring back at me. I felt a wave of fear wash over me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Emily," I whispered, my voice trembling. "If you're here, please give me a sign." The figure outside the window seemed to react to my words. It raised a hand and pointed to the corner of the room. I turned to look, and there, in the dim light, I saw a painting leaning against the wall. It was one of Emily's works, a haunting portrait of a woman with sad, empty eyes. I approached the painting, my hand shaking. As I touched the canvas, I felt a surge of energy, and the room seemed to come alive with whispers and shadows. I knew then that Emily's spirit was indeed trapped in the apartment, and she was trying to communicate with me through her art. Over the next few days, I continued to experience strange occurrences. The tapping and scratching persisted, and I often felt a cold presence in the room. But I also began to notice other things. The paintings in the apartment seemed to change, their colors shifting and shapes morphing as if they were alive. I realized that Emily was using her art to tell her story, to show me what had happened to her. One night, as I was studying one of the paintings, I noticed a hidden message scrawled in the corner. It was a single word: help. My heart ached for Emily, and I knew I had to find a way to free her spirit. I decided to consult a paranormal expert, hoping they could help me understand what was happening. I found a local medium named Sarah, who agreed to visit the apartment and conduct a seance. As we sat in the living room, surrounded by candles, Sarah closed her eyes and began to chant. The room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to dance around us. Suddenly, Sarah's eyes flew open, and she spoke in a voice that was not her own. "Emily is here," she said. "She is trapped, unable to move on because of the unfinished painting. She needs your help to complete it." I looked at the painting, the one with the sad, empty eyes. I realized that it was missing something, a final touch that would bring it to life. I picked up a brush and began to paint, guided by an unseen force. As I worked, the room seemed to glow with a soft, ethereal light. When I finished, the painting was complete. The woman's eyes were no longer sad and empty, they were filled with peace and contentment. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, and I knew that Emily's spirit was finally free. The disturbances in the apartment ceased, and the atmosphere became warm and inviting. I felt a deep sense of connection to Emily, and I knew that her spirit would always be a part of the apartment. I continued to live there, cherishing the peace and beauty that Emily had brought into my life. With Emily's spirit seemingly at peace, I thought the disturbances would end. For a few days, the apartment was calm, and I began to feel a sense of normalcy returning to my life. However, this peace was short-lived. One night, as I was preparing for bed, I heard a faint whispering sound coming from the living room. My heart sank as I realized that the disturbances had returned. I cautiously made my way to the living room, where I found the painting of the woman with the sad eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. The whispering grew louder, and I could make out a single word: danger. I felt a chill run down my spine. What could Emily be warning me about? I decided to reach out to Sarah, the medium who had helped me before. She agreed to come over the next day to investigate further. When Sarah arrived, she immediately sensed a dark presence in the apartment. "There's something else here," she said, her voice trembling. "Something malevolent." We decided to conduct another seance to try and communicate with whatever was haunting the apartment. As we sat in the living room, surrounded by candles, Sarah began to chant. The room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around us. Suddenly, the candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder, and I gasped in fear. Sarah's eyes flew open, and she spoke in a voice that was not her own. "Leave this place," the voice hissed. "You are not welcome here." I felt a surge of terror, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" The voice laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "I am the darkness that dwells within these walls," it said. "I feed on fear and despair. You cannot escape me." I looked at Sarah, who seemed to be struggling to maintain control. "We need to find a way to banish this spirit," she said, her voice strained. "It's too powerful to confront directly." We decided to do some research on the building's history, hoping to find a clue about the malevolent spirit. We discovered that the land on which the building was constructed had once been the site of a gruesome murder. A man named Victor had killed his entire family in a fit of rage before taking his own life. It was said that his spirit had never found peace and continued to haunt the area. Armed with this knowledge, we decided to perform a ritual to cleanse the apartment of Victor's spirit. We gathered the necessary materials: sage, salt, and a protective talisman. As we prepared for the ritual, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. That night, we began the ritual. Sarah lit the sage and began to walk through the apartment, chanting a cleansing incantation. I followed her, sprinkling salt in the corners of each room. As we moved through the apartment, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist around us. When we reached the living room, the temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath in the air. The painting of the woman with the sad eyes began to glow again, and I felt a surge of fear. Sarah placed the protective talisman on the painting and continued to chant. Suddenly, the room was filled with a deafening roar, and the shadows seemed to converge on us. I felt a cold hand grip my arm, and I cried out in pain. Sarah's chanting grew louder, and the talisman began to glow with a bright, white light. The shadows recoiled, and the cold hand released its grip on me. I watched in awe as the light from the talisman grew brighter, banishing the darkness from the room. The roar subsided, and the temperature began to rise. When the ritual was complete, the apartment felt different. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and I felt a sense of peace and relief. Sarah smiled at me, her face pale but determined. "We did it," she said. "Victor's spirit has been banished. You should be safe now." I thanked Sarah for her help and watched as she left the apartment. As I stood in the living room, I felt a sense of closure. The disturbances had ended, and I knew that both Emily and Victor's spirits had found peace. Over the next few weeks, I continued to live in the apartment, cherishing the newfound tranquility. The painting of the woman with the sad eyes remained on the wall, a reminder of the events that had transpired. I felt a deep connection to Emily and a sense of gratitude for her warning. Life slowly returned to normal, and I found myself enjoying the beauty of the city once more. The apartment, once a place of fear and dread, had become a sanctuary of peace and reflection. I knew that I would always carry the memory of Emily and Victor with me, a testament to the power of the human spirit and the resilience of the soul. With the malevolent spirit of Victor banished, I thought the worst was behind me. The apartment felt lighter, and the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. However, the peace was short-lived. A few nights later, I was jolted awake by a loud crash coming from the living room. My heart pounded as I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made my way to investigate. When I entered the living room, I found the painting of the woman with the sad eyes lying on the floor, the protective talisman shattered beside it. The glass in the frame was cracked, and the woman's eyes seemed to follow me as I moved. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Had Victor's spirit returned, or was there something else at play? Determined to find answers, I decided to reach out to Sarah once more. She agreed to come over the next day to help me investigate further. When she arrived, she immediately sensed a lingering presence in the apartment. "There's still something here," she said, her voice filled with concern. "It feels different from before, though. We need to be careful." We decided to conduct another seance to try and communicate with the spirit. As we sat in the living room, surrounded by candles, Sarah began to chant. The room grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around us. Suddenly, the candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder, and I gasped in fear. Sarah's eyes flew open, and she spoke in a voice that was not her own. "Help me," the voice whispered. "I am trapped." I felt a surge of compassion for the spirit. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "How can we help you?" The voice sighed, a sound filled with sorrow. "I am Emily," it said. "I thought I was free, but something is holding me back. Please, you must find the key." I looked at Sarah, who seemed to be struggling to maintain control. "What key?" I asked. "Where can we find it?" The voice grew fainter. "The key is hidden in the place where I created my art," it said. "Find it, and you will set me free." With that, the presence faded, and the room grew warmer. Sarah looked at me, her face pale but determined. "We need to find this key," she said. "It's the only way to help Emily." We decided to search the apartment for any clues. As we combed through the rooms, I remembered the small studio space where Emily had painted. It was a tiny room at the back of the apartment, filled with old canvases and art supplies. We began to search the studio, looking for anything that might resemble a key. After hours of searching, we found a small, ornate box hidden behind a stack of canvases. Inside the box was a delicate, antique key. I felt a surge of hope as I held the key in my hand. Could this be the key that would set Emily free? We returned to the living room, where the painting of the woman with the sad eyes still lay on the floor. I carefully picked up the painting and examined it closely. There, in the corner of the frame, was a small keyhole. My hands trembled as I inserted the key and turned it. The room was filled with a blinding light, and I felt a rush of energy. The painting seemed to come alive, the colors shifting and swirling. The woman's eyes, once filled with sadness, now sparkled with joy. I felt a sense of peace wash over me, and I knew that Emily's spirit was finally free. The disturbances in the apartment ceased, and the atmosphere became warm and inviting. I felt a deep sense of connection to Emily and a sense of gratitude for her warning. Life slowly returned to normal, and I found myself enjoying the beauty of the city once more. However, the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Emily's sister, who had heard about my experiences in the apartment. She thanked me for helping to set Emily's spirit free and invited me to visit her family home to learn more about Emily's life and art. Intrigued, I decided to accept the invitation. When I arrived at the family home, I was greeted warmly by Emily's sister, Margaret. She led me to a small, cozy room filled with Emily's paintings. As I looked around, I felt a deep sense of connection to the artist. Margaret shared stories about Emily's life, her passion for art, and the struggles she had faced. She showed me a collection of Emily's journals, filled with sketches and notes about her creative process. I felt honored to learn more about the woman whose spirit had touched my life so profoundly. As I prepared to leave, Margaret handed me a small, wrapped package. "This is for you," she said, her eyes filled with gratitude. "It's one of Emily's last paintings. I think she would want you to have it." I carefully unwrapped the package and found a beautiful painting of a serene landscape, filled with vibrant colors and a sense of peace. I felt a lump in my throat as I realized the significance of the gift. Emily's spirit had found peace, and she had left a piece of herself with me. I returned to my apartment, feeling a sense of closure and fulfillment. The painting now hung on my wall, a reminder of the journey I had taken and the connection I had forged with Emily. The apartment, once a place of fear and dread, had become a sanctuary of peace and reflection. As the years went by, I continued to live in the apartment, cherishing the memories of Emily and the lessons I had learned. I knew that her spirit would always be a part of my life, a testament to the power of art and the resilience of the human soul. And so, the story of Emily in the haunted apartment came to an end. but the impact of her spirit and her art would live on, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope and light to be found.